Take a look at the big story this evening. It's the last lap for the U.S. debt ceiling deal to begin in a few hours from now. The U.S. Congress is set to vote on the bill later tonight. If the bill passes through both the House and the Senate, it will pave way for the suspension of the U.S. debt limit through 1st January 2025. The current limit on debt stands at $31.4 trillion, which the U.S. hit in January this year. President Joe Biden, as well as top Republican leaders, have expressed confidence that the bill will get a simple majority in the House as well as the Senate. And to speak more on this, I'm joined now by Craig Erlam, Senior Market Analyst, and Anurag Singh, Managing Partner at Ansid Capital. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Anurag, let me begin with your take. Is there any suspense left in this story, or is it just a matter of how soon? Because there were some murmurs that even though McCarthy and Biden have agreed, those on the far right and the far left may put some spanner in the works. Are the numbers, though, in their favor?
So, Tamanna, looks like the deal will pass. And, I understand there are extremes on both sides and they're making noises, but currently looks like the noises are more like a rhetoric for their base versus anything significant. Look, there was always this risk that enough Republicans can gather, and because they can oust McCarthy, even if 5-7 Republicans gather, they can take him out of the speakership. I don't think they're going to shoot them themselves in the foot. So ultimately, the nation needs to move on. And I think, as I'll just lay down when we move on to some of the numbers, that it's basically, barely, about 7 to 8% of the budget which is under discussion. The rest of it is mandatory. You can't touch it. And until you tackle those tough questions, basically you can't do much. So basically just about $700 to $800 billion of spending was all that was to discuss. And that's all they have discussed ultimately, Tamanna. So the bill will pass this evening, probably. But I think the nation is getting more aware by this exercise that, the spending needs to be curtailed and the difficult decisions will need to be taken at some point.
What has happened is they've kicked the can down the road and figuring that in 2025 it's someone else's problem. Joe Biden's hoping it's his problem once again. That's interesting. I want to just talk about how U.S. markets are sort of responding to this. And there seems to be a bit of uncertainty, a bit of suspense going there. Craig, how do you read the situation?
I think there is a little bit of suspense, perhaps, but I think that's also partly because, we're in this situation at the moment with the economy, with inflation, with interest rates, where we're waiting to see if the data is going to improve as many expect and hope, and so far it hasn't. And the debt ceiling has provided a bit of a distraction to that. If you speak to anyone in the markets, I'm yet to find anyone who believes the US is going to default on its debt, who thinks that this was ever going to go past this much talked about X dates, whenever that proves to be. We've seen this before, we've been here before, and it all ends the same way, an 11th hour deal. And that's what everyone has been expecting, and that looks as though what we're going to get once more. So any suspense in the markets is probably more related to the other stories than an actual genuine expectation that the US could actually default on its debts. And I think once this week passes, we'll probably see that suspense continue, because we've got the jobs report on Friday, then we've got some inflation data to come, the Federal Reserve then in the middle of the month, and all focus will be on that. And that suspense, I don't actually think will go away until we get a better grasp of the broader data.
About the debt ceiling issue in all, because I'm looking at the Dow now down nearly 300 points, all of it, NASDAQ, S&P 500 also down in the red. So what about the debt ceiling issue? Is that now a closed story, or is there lingering concern that it's going to come at a cost, that this agreement has come at a cost? That follow-up question to Craig again.
I don't think it's come at a cost. Like I say, we've been here so many times before. We know how these things go. And especially when you've got a split Congress, it means that the two sides have to find compromises. And it's never been a politically clever thing to find compromises early. When they're facing elections next year, you have to be seen to be fighting your corner and fighting it hard. So they're effectively just playing out the roles of the kind of pantomime roles that we generally expect. That's not to say there hasn't been tough negotiations and that there hasn't been difficult compromises made. But I think even when we hear from certain far-right Republicans, for example, who have suggested that we should test the water with this, we should see if this X date is the real X date, and the US will never fully default on its debt because so much of the cash that we spend off cash flow is tax revenue and so on and so forth. They're not being legitimate. No one wants to see what this will ultimately look like, least of all when we're still recovering from pandemics and war-related shocks. This is not the time to be testing those boundaries. And it's another reason why it's just simply not going to happen.
All right, Anurag, your take on whether the debt ceiling resolution, which is likely to come by tomorrow, I think India time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, will that end the uncertainty in the global markets, or as Craig says, there's a whole host of other things to worry about next?
No. So it'll at least take one big problem out of the way, right? Just a quick take on the numbers, Tamanna. All they discussed in this whole drama was the discretionary spending element of the budget. Nothing else was touched. So Republicans wanted a $690 billion of discretionary spending. Democrats wanted a $757 billion. So they were just apart by $70 billion. On a $6 trillion budget, that's all was under discussion. They ended up agreeing at a number of $704 billion. So just about 14 billion above what Republicans wanted, about 35-40 billion below what Democrats wanted. That's all this drama was about. So I just want to lay it out there. Ultimately, very limited was at play. They will get it done. The bigger questions are, the rest 90% of the budget, which is, most of it is entitlement plus defense. And unless they try and do something about it, the debt ceiling kind of seems to be heading upwards. On the markets, Tamanna, look, I think the worry stays. The PCE data has come in and it has come in above the expectation. If you see the PCE data, inflation 4.7%, that is the similar range that between 4.5 to 4.9, we've been hovering for the last 1 year. Federal Reserve, some of them are speaking more vocally. Mester has said, today that it is not a time to pause. I can tell you it might be just some political compulsions or a chance to give an opportunity for the economy to come back. But Federal Reserve, pretty much everybody knows that they haven't made a headway, and they can't unless there is a severe labor market slowdown. And we don't seem to be on that point when the unemployment is just about 3.4%. It is a bit too low for comfort, Tamanna. So I think that stays the bigger worry. Fed might want to wait another couple of months just to stabilize the economy, but they might have to come back with even bigger force. We don't want that outcome, Tamanna, but ultimately, whenever recession comes back, and it has come back after 40 years, mostly, it's not an easy problem that will just go away, just because people want it to. That's my suspicion. That's my fear. That's my positioning also in the market.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today as we wait for the final stamp on this sort of controversy and back and forth that has been going on for weeks. At least it's now put to rest till 2025. Well, moving